Jennifer Ely or Keira Knightley? Colin Firth or Matthew Macfadyen? There are adaptations of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and then there is perfection. Welcome to Think Thing, a channel featuring video essays about movies, TV, science, culture, politics, or whatever else I think is interesting. If that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing. It would help me out a bunch. Thanks. In the past 30 years, the world has been treated to a number of excellent filmed Jane Austen adaptations, whether in the form of transmogrifications like the Bridget Jones films and Clueless, or straight-ahead period pieces like Autumn de Wilde's recent adaptation of Emma or Ang Lee's outstanding 1995 version of Sense and Sensibility. 1995 and 96 was a particularly stellar period for Jane Austen adaptations. 2005's Pride and Prejudice, note the ampersand replacing the word and, with Keira Knightley as Elizabeth Bennet and Matthew Macfadyen as Mr. Darcy, was a hit, and indeed, it is a fine adaptation, although these days it's difficult to see Matthew Macfadyen in anything and not have his performance polluted by the spirit of Tom Wamsgans.
You have bewitched me, body and soul, and I love you.
But the greatest Jane Austen adaptation of all remains 1995's amazing 6-hour-long BBC production of Pride and Prejudice from Andrew Davies. I can practically quote the whole thing. I've seen it so many times.
I'm quite put out.
The casting is perfection, and the mood of the story is at turns serious, romantic, and comical. The casting of the 2005 version is also terrific, and a few of the stars are arguably better actors, or at least more celebrated, than their 1995 BBC counterparts. Compare Dame Judi Dench as Lady Catherine de Bourgh to Barbara Lee Hunt, for example. Simon Woods and Rosamund Pike are both quite good as Mr. Bingley and Jane Bennet, respectively, and Brenda Blethyn is always amazing, and her turn as Mrs. Bennet is no outlier in her career. The 2005 film also looks wonderful, with believably candlelit nighttime scenes and sumptuous cinematography. But the 2005 version suffers in comparison to its 1995 counterpart in a few important ways, I think. Firstly, Pride and Prejudice is a 400-page book in its paperback form, and the 2005 film's runtime of just over 2 hours simply doesn't allow for much nuance or character growth. Lizzie Bennet's relationship with Mr. Wickham, for example, is barely given one scene in the film, while the 6 hours of the 1995 adaptation allows time for that relationship to mature, such that when her trust in the man is shaken, it resonates with the viewers. Wickham's fall from grace is central to the plot of Pride and Prejudice, and the 2005 film just doesn't have the minutes to spare to show it to us. The 127-minute film feels rushed. Secondly, the 2005 film's tone is decidedly more dour than the 1995 series. Broad comic characters, like the insufferably ridiculous Mr. Collins and the ever-vexed Mrs. Bennet, are played for laughs, but there's a realism and pathos in their performances that, while laudable, misses some of the overt silliness that imbues the 1995 series. This strikes me as a missed opportunity and a fundamental misread of the novel.
The dinner, too, in its turn, was highly admired, and he begged to know to which of his fair cousins the excellency of its cooking was owing. But he was set right there by Mrs. Bennet, who assured him with some asperity that they were very well able to keep a good cook, and that her daughters had nothing to do in the kitchen. He begged pardon for having displeased her. In a softened tone, she declared herself not at all offended, but he continued to apologize for about a quarter of an hour.
The 2005 film doesn't get the tone completely wrong.
Many years since I've had such an exemplary vegetable.
But it fails to live up to the inherent absurdity of scenes like this, it seems to me. By contrast, the 1995 series is all in on the inane pompousness and absurd entitlement that Austen was so cleverly mocking.
You may imagine, sir, how happy I am on every occasion to offer those little delicate compliments which are always acceptable to ladies.
And finally, there's the character of Darcy. Colin Firth plays the role proud and standoffish. He's above nonsense like country dances and the quaint charm of rural life, and he sees his station as being decidedly above that of just about everyone else, often even those within his own social class. He is awkward, but only when it comes to Elizabeth. She throws his whole worldview off kilter, and he's flummoxed by her. Both his pride and prejudice are undone by her, as hers are undone by him in a somewhat different way. Matthew Macfadyen's Darcy, by contrast, is not so much prideful as he is entirely overwhelmed by every social interaction. He acts like a man who would prefer to never be perceived at all in the first place, like he'd rather curl up into a ball and disappear completely. But because he understands his role in society, he knows it's his duty to be cordial and accompany his friend to country dances, and to bear the distasteful onus of polite society. But it pains him emotionally to experience social interactions at all. Again, it's Elizabeth who draws him out. But the demons that Macfadyen's Darcy is overcoming are a bit different than Firth's. I prefer the 1995 take on the character, and I think it's a closer adaptation of Darcy from the novel, but I see the appeal of both. What's more worrisome is this moment from the dramatic proposal scene in the 2005 version.
From the first moment I met you, your arrogance and conceit, your selfish disdain for the feelings of others, made me realize that you were the last man in the world I could ever be prevailed upon to marry.
Wait, I'm sorry, what? The way this scene is performed and edited makes it look like Darcy is about to kiss Elizabeth here. And while I can believe the character might, in his heart of hearts, want that to happen, there is simply no way he would ever behave in a way that shows what his heart of hearts wants here. At this point in the conversation, he has made himself vulnerable and has been rebuffed in no uncertain terms by Elizabeth. Darcy is in full retreat at this moment and doing emotional triage. A man of lesser character would lash out at Elizabeth in this moment. Darcy, however, is a man of great character, and so instead he simply retreats and sets about at least setting the record straight so that she is not guided by any misunderstanding. This will they, won't they beat is entirely out of place, and again, I get why they did it. I see the appeal, but I hate it. What's worse is there's a brief moment where it looks like Elizabeth might kiss Darcy too. Elizabeth loathes Darcy at this moment. He is beneath her contempt and the last man she would ever kiss, let alone marry. I actively hate this scene in the 2005 movie because of this moment. Perhaps most damning is the simple fact that I just don't really have a desire to re-watch the 2005 film, while I can watch 1995's version over and over again. That's the funny thing about comfort watches. Sometimes the thing that makes them so rewatchable is greater than the sum of all their parts. For whatever it's worth, my opinion is not exactly aligned with critical reactions generally, and both adaptations appear to be equally beloved. What do you think? What's your favorite Jane Austen adaptation? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.